When I wrapped up Alan Wake 2 recently, the New Game Plus option that unlocked called the Final Draft caught my attention. Largely because I noticed some differences in Alan's opening dialogue when I started a new game. I've dabbled in the mode now for a good few hours, and while there are differences, they are pretty few and far between. I'm sure I've not seen them all, having made it through just the first couple of chapters of Return, and the first few parts of Initiation, including the subway sequence. But it sounds like it's the ending that changes or expands the most, and that's a ways off. I've picked up a couple of documents and media entries that are new. Pretty neat additions, but they haven't provided a great deal of additional detail. My experience from the first playthrough drastically accelerated things starting again. I still spent quite a bit of time fooling around since I was simply still having fun, and it was cool to experience the opening sequences of the game again with a lot more experience. Gun upgrades and words of power carry over, as do charms and guns once you reach a shoebox. Even on Nightmare, which I decided to try out, things were going smoothly. My impression of Nightmare in the early stages is that it didn't seem too difficult. I hardly noticed a difference at all until the Nightingale fight. I died on that one many times getting used to the timing of dodging his attacks again, but once I did, even that wasn't too bad. Enemies take about the same amount of damage to kill, but the damage they do seems higher. I died very quickly if I got hit by Nightingale in particular. I'm sure the other bosses and the summoning chapter later on would be difficult. As much as I would like to run through the game again and see the remaining differences, it's a tough sell given my limited time. If the expanded ending provides the most important new material, I might just check that out somewhere. I do think the Final Draft mode and it having some new story details is a really cool little addition to the game. But there's new stuff I could be playing, including something from Remedy I'd skipped over while catching up before Alan Wake 2. I've been left with some questions around Sheriff Breaker and his apparent connection to Warland Door after the ending of Alan Wake. Breaker alludes to having very vivid dreams with weird occurrences over a long period of time. That got me thinking, is Quantum Break connected somehow, even though it hadn't seemed to be? The actor that plays Tim Breaker is the same actor that plays the main role in Quantum Break. And maybe it's a little on the nose, but Quantum Break and Sheriff Breaker? Maybe there's something there. It doesn't sound like it's a long game, so given a reason, why not check it out? When deciding whether or not to play all the way through the Final Draft, I was also thinking about the fact that Alan Wake 2 is going to have some additional content at some point. That would be an obvious excuse to come back and play more. Considering it had been a good 8 months or so since the game's release when I finished, I was kind of surprised there wasn't news of the DLC. Turned out this wouldn't be the case much longer, as the first DLC, called Night Springs, was unveiled just the other day at Summer Games Fest, with a release date of, well, now. By the time this video is up, it'll have been out for a good couple of days, and I'm eager to jump into that next. I imagine you all may know more about it than I do at this point, but Night Springs sounds like more of a side story, maybe harkening back to American Nightmare, and how it takes place in a separate dimension of the Dark Place. I think I mostly anticipate more fun gameplay from it, but the characters it follows are pretty central, and include Jesse Faden from Control and Sheriff Breaker. I'm especially excited about the latter, having now played Quantum Break. Maybe there will be some hints of things to come, as well as connections back to those games. Speaking of having played Quantum Break, I don't think I'll have time to make a separate video for it, so here are a few thoughts. In short, I had quite a bit of fun with it. It's not long, nor hard, aside from a chaotic and confusing final fight that takes a few tries. The live-action episodes that focused a bit more on secondary characters weren't that interesting to me. I would have preferred the important events just to happen in the game. It was the story and the potential connections to other elements of the Remedyverse that kept my interest, though. It's a precursor to Control as far as the action gameplay, but not as well executed, and the action sequences are fairly few. The gunplay in particular felt weak, but was serviceable enough combined with the time powers that were a lot more fun. In isolation, it's a pretty neat time travel story, with some novel elements like the past being fixed and immutable, which remains unverified to an extent, and time travel only being possible during the operational lifetime of the time machine, meaning one cannot travel further into the past than when it was activated in 1999. As far as larger implications of the story and connections to other Remedy games, it certainly seems likely they exist. The events of Quantum Break could very well be an altered world event. It clearly takes place in the same world as Control and Alan Wake. Paul Serene, Jack Joyce, and Martin Hatch all have abilities that could be termed paranatural. Hatch is trying to end our reality to preserve or renew his own, hearkening again to multiple worlds or realities. The shifter beings and the end of time are described with characteristics reminiscent of the Dark Place and the beings that inhabit it. It seems unlikely that Jack Joyce would choose to join forces with Hatch at Monarch in the final choice of the game, a choice that is left unresolved. Maybe this has led to the animosity between Breaker and Door, who are really Joyce and Hatch, or otherwise connected to them somehow. Tenuous, maybe, but fun, and I think Remedy have left themselves room, retconning or not, to do whatever they want. I'm glad I played Quantum Break. It was definitely a gap for me in seeing the evolution of Remedy as a game developer. It was fun on its own, and it provided some of that hope for missing context that will likely come in handy in future Remedy games. By the way, don't play the Windows Store version, or maybe even the Game Pass version either, if it's the same one. I had the Windows Store version from years ago, and it seems pretty broken today on latest graphics drivers or hardware. There were bright purple and green lighting artifacts in a number of places that block visibility of important things, and make the game pretty much unplayable in at least a couple of areas. I switched over to the Steam version, which can pretty frequently be found on a big discount, and didn't have any problems with it. So with that, I think I'm ready to jump into Night Springs. The timing has worked out really well to be able to do that. I hope the other DLC, which is called The Lake House, won't be far off either. That one sounds like it might be a little more directly related to the story of Alan Wake 2, considering the Lake House is, or was, one of the Federal Bureau of Control's research sites around Cauldron Lake during Return. I took a little bit of a break after Alan Wake 2, but expect more soon on Night Springs and Zelda. Until then, and as always, thank you for tuning in, and take care.